is a beautiful Sunday all around the world. We are presenting here from the Kesh Foundation TV Spaceship Institute, and this is where science meets the soul. And science needs to meet the soul of man for peace. And these are not just idle words, as you can see by all the badges here, as the souls are aggregating to create an impact on this planet. And as such, I would like to introduce this class on plasma science. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute. It is part of the Advanced Knowing series. Today's topic is Unlimitations. Actually, there's one word that's missing here, if I may. It's a very important word, and we all know what it is, right? It's the soul, Unlimitations. And my name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is January 23rd, 2022. And this is the Kesh Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. And as such, it includes Canada, a peacekeeping nation, the United Nations, the United States, the United Nations of the Hispanic community, mainly as far as North America is concerned, that'd be part of Mexico. And we still have these other states. We have the United States of Emergency still. And that is not even restricted to this continent, where we have the state of the pandemic, and we still have effects from mudslides, flooding, tornadoes, and even tsunamis. And then, of course, this is all reflected in the state of the economy. And so there are many, many states. But as I said, this is part of the advanced knowing, but it happens to be the last class in this series. And so what I've tried to do is break down all of these classes going back to October 14th, 2020, where we have basic teaching, and then we went into basic understanding, and then we went into basic knowing. And as such, we progressed through these basic classes, and we are at the end of the Advanced Knowing series. And in the Advanced Knowing series, we try to look at the subjects like the speed of life, the plasmagen state, another state, nanobiology, our emotional transformation, the supragranular layer. And today we are discussing soul unlimitations. That's right, unlimitations, which means we've had a lot of limitations. So I want to welcome you to the Plasmagen Travel Agency. We all need to understand that we're born to Earth. Many of us don't know how, and too many of us don't care to know how. But we were born for a reason, and as I said, many of us don't know why, and too many of us don't care to know why. And there are some who want to travel to Mars, and they don't really know how, and they don't really know why, and they don't care to know why you were not born to Mars in the first place. And so we have another state to deal with, and that's a state of ignorance. But ignorance has two meanings. One, you could be ignorant as in just being unaware, and that has a lot to do with your society that you're in, because that involves education as well. But there are those who are ignorant because they are aware, but they're unwilling. And so all of us seem to have this trouble where we can't cross the bridge, or we don't know how to cross the bridge. And as a result, too many of us don't want to cross the bridge. And what is this bridge? This bridge of knowing, and the limitations that are placed on it by another state, the state of corruption. And lest anyone get insulted, I just want to let you know that you can't insult the ignorant. So for the rest of us, it's time to get dirty, because We have a lot of problems.
Scusa.
We have a lot of problems on this planet, and the number one illness is cancer. And we still are talking about that, but the solution is on the way. We are traveling in uncharted skies now. So at this point in time, and this is going to be a little bit longer lesson because this is the final lesson. So I ask you to follow me as the leader, but please understand that I'm also a student. And so as a teacher, I become a student. And with these words, I hope you can hear me. For a lot of people, only what they see is what they believe. And so we have to sort this out. And that's why we have very rough seas ahead. And as knowledge seekers, we have to learn how to navigate on this planet, navigate in the inner space, navigate in outer space. And these are all really uncharted. And the best way to do that is to understand that the universe is the provider. And so we need to tune in, and we need to turn on to the energies that are being provided by the universe. And as such, we have to drop out of our limitations and in fact, drop in to our unlimitations. So it's T-minus 133 days to the launch to the moon, June the 6th, 2022. Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute is planning on launching to the moon in and around that date. So book your tickets with the Plasma Gen Travel Agency and understand that, you know, just because you're born to Earth, you are already a traveler. You are a soul traveler. And you don't need to carry baggage. So please proceed to the baggage check-in and check your baggage in there. Understand that you were born for a reason. And that reason is to be a universal functionary. So please proceed to the departure lounge because flight 2022 is now boarding. And we're going to have a very nice trip as we tumble through space. So I hope you all have a nice trip, suckers. We're talking about the creation of the universe. And why are we able to talk about the creation of the universe and how the universe is created? Because we now have the answers. All of us have asked this question, and too many have come up with the answer. Well, do you know? I don't know. Well, the universe exists from energy, you see, and energy is always in motion, you see, and energy, therefore, is positive, and therefore has to have a charge because that charge is representing the motion. And this energy can come together, or it can just tumble right through space, or it can go somewhere. And so this is all represented in book number 1, The Universal Order of the Creation of Matters. And as you see, the combination of the MagRav field there, and that is a plasma field. And when you get 2 plasma fields, they interact, just like the cups of life. We have 2 cups of life. Understand that these are not the cups of pandemic. One is the cup of emotion, and one is the cup of physicality. And both cups basically have a physical construction. And as a result of this physical construction, we create a magnetical field and a gravitational field. And as such, there is a relationship. And so these cups themselves have a relationship. So if we're still using these cups for our pandemic requirements, as you make your GANs, please keep them at least 1 meter apart because there are different aspects. There are emotional aspects and physical aspects. But once we put the 2 together, then they become the cups of man. And all of these fields work together, and they include the soul. And so each cup has a magnetical field, a gravitational field, and a soul field. And we, as emotional, physical beings with a soul, interact with this Earth, which also has a magnetical gravitational relationship. And so the interaction between us as physical beings and the Earth as a physical being is what we call the cup of inertia. And so it too has a magnetical gravitational field and a soul field. So fundamentally, plasma science is based on the magnetical field forces of attraction and repulsion. Very simple. Simple to say, not so simple to understand if we have to get into the details. So some of the details is that it is a two-way street. Most of us have been taught that it's a one-way street. And the two-way street involves both attraction and repulsion. Well, how can you be a two-way street at the same time? Well, that's the Maggrav condition. So the direction of flow is based on something else. It's plus the magnetical or plus the gravitational. And depending on which way you're going, it's either creation or it's decay. So the way you are going and what you are going with is the energy in motion. And so if we say that we are giving magnetically, that is an emission energy. And if we are saying that we are taking gravitationally, that is an absorption energy. So as this is an advanced class for many of the new knowledge seekers, a lot of all these details have been described actually in detail in the previous classes. So what we're trying to do is to bring all of these components together to understand the relationships. So fundamentally, we're saying that the Maggrav condition is a balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. So scientifically speaking, there's a conservation of magnetic fields. Conservation of magnetic fields. When we say that, we're talking about physical magnetic fields. But there's also a conservation of energy. And energy is not something that you can see. In fact, it's not something that you can hold. You all understand that there's energy in a battery, and you can hold a battery, but you can't hold the energy. And somehow the energy flows from within the battery and goes somewhere. And so this is how science describes energy in motion. Now, spiritually speaking, we can't see this energy either, but spiritually we say that we have a soul, and the connection between the spirit and the soul is actually the motor that drives us. And unfortunately, we can't explain that with our spiritual teachings either. So with the plasma science, we're adding to the knowledge. So we combine these two, where the science and the spirit come together for the soul of the man, for peace on this planet. And we already know all around us that we are having a problem, because when we look into the sky and we see a rainbow, we can see underneath the rainbow, and we look right down to the ground, we can see our earth, and we can see all the colors. But when we look beyond the rainbow, we can't see the colors. So what's beyond the rainbow? Just because we can't see it doesn't mean there's nothing there. And just because we can see it, we don't really know how it got there, do we? Unless we take other things into account. So this is the difference between the plasma science and the science of physics. And this is one of the things that we've been trying to cross this bridge and connect these two. But how can you connect it when you can't see it? So we have to understand the nature of relationships. So one of the limitations has been one of the limitations that's been is our understanding of the difference between outer space and inner space. So when we look at our inner space, we see energy as a particle, and we also see it as a wave, and we kind of get confused. But when we go into outer space, we have to talk about energy fields. And energy goes between these fields, as does a photon. And a photon is light. And as we just discussed, that light could be visible or non-visible. So if the light is visible, that is a photon. But if the light is invisible, does that mean it's a non-photon? And that's the vanishing point that we have a problem with, because scientifically speaking, verification and validation is the basis of science. But there's a limitation. That limitation is that the verification and validation has to be done by man-made means. So in order to make it, we have to know that it's there. Well, how do you know that it's there when you can't see it, when you can't hear it, when you can't touch it? How do you know that it's there? And if you don't have those criteria, how can you build the machine to measure? And so the way we understand our existence is through verification and validation for our existence. And so this we call confirmation. And this confirmation is limited to what we can see. So what we do know is that when you have a balanced maggrav, the balanced maggrav is invisible. What we're seeing is the magnetical addition to the maggrav, or the gravitational addition to the maggrav. And so understanding this is what is limiting not only our science, but it's limiting our souls, because it's limiting our souls to what we are born to it, and we are born to this planet. And so when we say, well, you know, we only believe what we see, and so from out of nothing, we created GANs. We created GANs in our cups. And then within our GANs, we created a hole. And there's nothing there either. And so this is all based on the susceptibility of energy and motion. And if there's nothing in that hole, then is there a soul in that hole? And so we can ask the other kinds of questions then. When we look at all three books of the basic plasma series, where we add to it the structure of light. And that's what we're talking about, the structure of light. Where did it come from? Where is it going? And that is the link. And the origin of the universe. Well, if the origin of the universe is connected to something, what is that? That is your source. But if the source is the creation of matter, and the matter comes from the origin of the universe, then the origin of the universe is the source. Well, I'm confused. I don't know if this is backwards or if it's upside down. And so we're trying to get our understanding firmly planted, just like the vertical people. The vertical people, what we call the plants, don't seem to have trouble rooting. It's us, we just don't know which way we're going. So we do understand that there's a plasma, a matter plasma. And we do understand that it's physical and it is plasmatic, because all of us as knowledge seekers have experienced this personally, firsthand. So we know that something dominates, and it's not just what is dominating, but there's a common denominator. And so the common denominator question is it physical or is it plasmatic? So when we look at the basics, we started with nano coating. We nano coated our copper coils and our copper wires and our copper plates. And then we also nano coated other elements. And we found that there's a gap. And there are layers. And there are gaps between the layers. And so the combination of all these nanoparticles created star formations. And do we know if they're upside down or right side up? And do we know which way it's going? Well, yeah, it is. We do, because when we put our multimeters on them to give them a charge gradient, then we actually direct the flow. But we're not causing the flow. What we are causing is a combing, if you will, a combing of the field. So it sets up a pattern to allow the flow. So until there's a connection, well, there's no flow. If you don't know where you're going, how can you go anywhere? So, but what we do know is that we are not polymers, you see, because when you have 3 or more connections and it becomes a chain, that is a polymer. But when beyond 3 in the connection folds over, then we become an organic being. And that is how life is created. So the 5-cup stacker unit is a combination of the 3, which is the soul cup, the emotional cup, and the physical cup. And the other 2 cups, you have the earth cup at the bottom, and you have the cup of inertia that is in between the earth cup and the other 3 cups. So this is an odd number. Yes, it is. So where's the connection? Well, the earth is physical and our body is physical. So the center cup is common to the top 2 cups, completes the Holy Trinity. And the center cup is common to the bottom 2 cups, which completes the Holy Trinity. So the Holy Trinity is common to our physical body and is common to our physical earth. And so when we look at the periodic table of elements, what the problem is here is that they're all elementary. In other words, they're all standalones. And so we've isolated them. But we know now from our science that we can connect things. We can connect fields together. We have a balance of magnetical gravitational fields, and we have star formations. The most important star formation is carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. But we know in the elemental table that carbon is like a lump of coal. And we are not a lump of coal. So the carbon that we're connecting to is not the carbon coal, but it's a carbon energy. And so we call that carbogen. And to blend with the nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. So what we're saying also is that these elemental gases are gases in physical state, but there is a plasma nitrogen, as a plasma oxygen, and a plasma hydrogen. And the plasmatic star formation is the precursor for amino acid. So therefore, the precursor for amino acid is also aminogen. And we draw this in with our physicality, which we were talking about copper, zinc, and iron. And we were working within a field. And that field happens to be water that has a salt component in it. And so we have sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium salts in our environment. And there is some kind of energy that is connecting this. And that energy, we understand, is phosphoric. So when we look at ourselves and we see how the stacker units are stacked up, they look like a spine. And when they feed from the top down, don't they? But the thing is that they feed all of the components. So there is no discrimination. The feeding is unconditional. And depending on the field strength and the need, the energy is absorbed. So the condition of the feeding, it just feeds. And the condition of the absorption is based on the need. And so from that, collectively, that becomes one unit and within our bodies, and that gives us our spinal cord. And that energy goes from our spinal cord, which is positive, to our extremities, which are negative. So literally speaking, our head, our fingers, our toes, they're all negative, and our spine is positive. Well, fortunately for us, we have fatty acid, and the fatty acid is a product of the amino acid. And if we didn't have fatty acid, which has a characteristic of repelling water, then we would be just mush, because the fatty acid and the water that we have within us is not, or shall we say, has a boundary. And it's because of this boundary capacity that we can stand up and that we can exist. If we didn't have this boundary, as I say, we would have been mush. But when we look at this fatty acid, there's an interesting thing here, is because the structure of the fatty acid has a carbon spine, and the outer parts of the fatty acid are hydrogen. And so we just look at the top and the bottom. We're not going to look at the ends at this point, and we see that there's a balance. There's a balance, there's a hydrogen up and there's a hydrogen down. And so this happens to be a saturated fatty acid because there's a hydrogen on every link, and they're all in balance. So from the top to the bottom is a balanced magrev. And so a balanced magrev is invisible. And this would explain why we're having troubles seeing with x-rays, because it's invisible. But some things are more visible, but not clearly. You see, the thing is, when we look at x-rays, the only thing that we may clearly see is we may see a metal pin in the spine, or we may see shrapnel or a bullet or something, and that is fairly clear. Everything else is kind of fuzzy, including our skeleton. And so there's something that's going on there. So when we are able to kind of see an image inside, but it's really very fuzzy. And that is because we are in a balanced magrev position. So what that means, what you're looking at is the skin, and what you can't see is what's inside, because what's inside is in balance and it's invisible. Well, so then what happens when it's not in balance, like with cancer or an illness? Well, guess what? You can see that with an x-ray. But these carbons are linked. Well, how can they all be linked if they're the same? So opposite poles attract. So we don't know which way is up and which way is down. So in order to attract with polarity, we have to flip some of the carbons over. And isn't it interesting? If you flip an H, it's still an H. And if you flip a C, it's still a C. So we really don't know which way is up, but it doesn't matter. It's inside our plasma being, and we're organic beings. But the thing is, we know that our fingers, which connect, are negative. And we know that two negative charges repel. So if there's a repelling at the extremities, where's the connection? What is keeping these carbons connected? What is the bond? And so in science, we say, well, there's a bonding force. Oh, yeah? So we know that because we can all grab our hands together and we can build a peace stone, and we can build unity, and we can do this at the speed of light. But there's a missing link, and it's only missing because we can't see it. Where is it? And so we can't see it, we can't understand it, and we don't even want to talk about it. And these are contributing to our soul limitations. So our soul limitations also obey the laws of attraction and repulsion. And so energy is converging. Converging from where? And then energy is diverging. Well, diverging to where? And then how do we break these boundaries, and how do we cross over these boundaries? So, we all like to be independent, and fortunately we're all different, right? And just like every soul is different, and souls are like neutrons, so every neutron is different, isn't it? So these are all the independent variables, but they depend on other independent variables. Yeah. So we are interdependent. And it's not just interdependent on this planet, but we're interdependent in the universe. And somehow, some way, there's a connection. And so we talked about that, the emotional transformation. As you can see, it's an emotional transformation that overrides the physical transformation. And it does this at the speed of light. So in other words, the magnetical field forces which are gravitational and magnetical, are over and above the combination of the attraction and repulsion forces. In other words, there's energy over and above that is diverging, and there's energy over and above that is converging. And at some point in time, there's a crossover point. And so this actually has become what we call the nuclear fudge factor. And it is our lack of understanding which has placed limitations on our soul. So these limitations cannot be explained, but our independence and the variability of our independence can be explained, and the interdependence can be explained. And we all know that we can go through different emotional transformations, and that can be explained. So that what's left over, let's just fudge that. So as we review our plasma terminology, we know that plasma is natural. And so fundamentally, to understand how fields work together, the straight line dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis have been converted into X-axis being a rotation, Y-axis being polarity, Z-axis being the field strength. And so through our rotation is how we transmit. And we know that because we drive our cars along the ground. And we know by looking at the horizon that the Earth is curved. So how we transmit ourselves on this planet is we follow the rotation of the planet.
Okay, just a slight interruption. Thank you.
I'm back. Yes, thank you. So, however, if we go from the ground to the sky, that is a transition of fields. And so there are different field strengths, and we can transition these fields. So that's what a field is, whatever that range is of that particular field. And so we can transmute from one field to another. Each field is a plasma, and at that core, it has a plasma field strength, which determines its position. So it's these plasmas that position themselves compared to other plasmas. But when two plasmas interact, they create a dynamism in between. And that creates another field, and that is your dynamic plasma. So all of this obeys the rules of charges in motion. And so we find that physically we can transcend, and we know we can do this physically because we see that we can create GANs, and we can create a hole in the GANs, and we can see the physical manifestation of that hole in the GANs. But we did that without our physical interference. So we can do a lot of interference emotionally, and we can also do that with our souls. So there is a transcendence of us with our emotions, and there's a transcendence of our souls. And all of these things go through various geometries. So that's what I'm trying to describe here, so that we understand how the plasma works. So fundamentally, we know in physicality that we have transmission and transition. And so if we look at a circle and we compare the diameter of the circle to the perimeter of the circle, and we notice a couple of things. One of those things is that when we cross over the X and the Y axis, there's a crossover point in the center. And this crossover point is perpendicular. And that is the perpendicular vanishing point. Well, where does it go? Well, we have a relationship of pi, and that vanishing point is something that we can't see and we can't explain. So we call that a fudge factor. And so we need to have more target practice in how we go through these dimensions, which includes our physical, emotional, and soul dimensions. So when we talk about our physical dimension, the relationship of the diameter to the perimeter is 3.14 plus something. We don't know what that is. We can't account for it. So we're just going to fudge that. But we know that our Earth is physical. And we know that we have energy around the Earth. And we know that we have a plasma energy. So energy, all kinds of energy, seeks a path. So the energy comes in and goes out. But while it's within, it goes around. And if it can't go around and can't come in, then it maybe just goes right on through. And so what it does is we call susceptibility. And that susceptibility is determined by emission and absorption of energy. One moment. It is winter and the humidity is low. I apologize. So the emission is repulsion, and we call that a magnetical field force. And the absorption is attraction, and we call that the gravitational field force. So this energy is always in motion. And some of this energy we can see, and some of this energy we can't see. But we can see the product of that energy. So that product is based on the direction and strength of flow and the gradient charge versus the charge gradient. In other words, how strong is this energy and what direction is it going? Because that's what affects the transmutation or the field strength. And the field strength of the plasma is very important because when you get two plasmas together, you create a relationship. And that relationship reflects on the energy in motion. So the energy in motion, which we call a charge, is based on the synergy of the plasma energies, of the plasma fields, and the susceptibility of the energy relationship. So everything about natural plasma is a relationship reference. And our main reference is our physical range. But our physical range can transcend into a plasma range. How far? How big is large? I don't know. How small is small? So we need to have comparisons. We need to have measurements. And so we find with the old science we have a basis point of 1. And so there's more than 1 and there's less than 1. But the thing about in the plasma science is once we get out of the old box of the old science and we start to think outside of the box, we find that as things get really, really large or things get really, really small, there's a tendency to curvature. And it is this curvature that explains when two forces come together. If there is a common attraction, if there's a common denominator, if there's a common flavor, and if there's a nearness and proximity, they will come together and do a little dance, which we call the X and Y axis. And more energy keeps coming. And so this develops a field strength. And this energy then becomes the Z axis. So more energy keeps coming. And what is this energy that keeps coming? Well, this energy we call PM ticks. So the PM ticks keep coming. And what flavor are these PM ticks? Well, there are 7 billion of us on this planet, and each of us has over 70 trillion cells. And that doesn't count the vertical people, the planets, the universe, and everything else. So we don't know how many PM ticks there are, but what we do know is there sure is a wonderful assortment. And as they all come together and they do this little dance and they start to be attracted to the core, and they do this by going around and round and picking up more energy. The more energy you have, the more dense you become. So, but it's interesting because opposite poles repel. I mean, like poles repel, excuse me, like poles repel. So this energy in motion as a charge, and it comes in contact with another charge. So there's a deflection. And in this deflection, something causes them to deflect. They won't crash, they will just deflect. And that is not visible. So what we're saying is when we have two forces that are coming together and they're the same, and so these forces to move are in the magnetic condition. In other words, each force has a magnetical gravitational component. And if these two forces that are coming together and they have a common denominator, then they will be the same. And when you have two forces that are the same or in balance coming together, they are invisible. So what we're saying is when we look at the rotating field, and as that grows, that energy has to go somewhere. So that's where we get the y-axis, the transition. So the rotating field is transmission. The polar field is transition. And then you have a balanced mag-grav condition. And so with this representation of a balanced mag-grav condition, where it has two fields on the x-axis, two fields on the y-axis, and 6 fields altogether on the z-axis, they are all in balance. So this balanced mag-grav is actually invisible. And when we look at ray creation, science has recognized neutrons, and science has recognized electrons and protons. And science has recognized that there's a marriage between the electrons and the protons. The concept of PM ticks, the release of energy, the rays. This is the Kesh model of nuclear decay of the neutron. And so there's an energy being released. So one of the problems, of course, that we had to fudge was that the balance of the mass of the neutron has to be equal to the balance of the electron and the proton. But it didn't balance. So if it were to take 2 electron protons which don't have a neutron, or in other words, they have the characteristic of a PM tick. And as they come together, if they come together, the direction that they're going is magnetical. But let's just follow the rotation. So if we were to say there's an infinity loop within the electron-proton combination, and let's say for our argument's sake that the proton, which is the bigger one in this picture, is rotating clockwise. In order for the path around the infinity loop to actually work, then the electron would have to go counterclockwise. And the interaction point, the point where the PM ticks are emitted, it naturally comes out on the bottom side because both fields are rotating together and they come together at the interaction point. And that interaction point, something happens there, and we don't know what happens in physical science because we can't see it, but we know that that's a PM tick. Why am I belaboring that point? Because we want to see what happens on the other side. So we have the electron on the other side rotating clockwise and the proton rotating counterclockwise. Yep, that works because the energy can go around the infinity loop. And of course, at the interaction point, the PM tick is emitted. But there's something wrong with this picture because we had the PM ticks being released on the same side in both cases. So let's flip this around, shall we? So in fact, we've changed the polarity, but the fields are the same. So opposite poles attract and common fields attract. So we have changed the direction of the PM ticks leaving the interaction point. We still have our electron-proton marriage, but now they're facing each other. And when these two fields come together, because now the electrons are both rotating in the same direction. So when two come together, there's a connection. And it's because both are the same and both are in balance, then the connection is invisible. And that's what's been missing. To understand this non-visible connection between two visible fields. So when we look at cell structures and we see that we have phospholipids around, and the phospholipids keep the oil and the water separate, and we see that the energy outside of the cell is converging, but there is energy inside the cell that is diverging. But somehow that energy then has to go across the curvature and into the cell. So there's an outside and there's an inside, right? And somehow energy has to go back and forth. So it's not just a one-way street. So this is what we're talking about, the transmutation of the cells. And so when these cells come into the balance where they're giving and taking the energy, they become invisible, but they're there. And then each of these cells has basic DNA. And this DNA is in a helical coil, a spiral. And it has also RNA. And it too is in a spiral. But there's a perpendicular relationship. And that's only in 2 dimensions because this thing is a spiral. So we don't know, which dimension. We don't know which way is up. We don't know which way is forward or backwards. But what we do know is that there's a feeding, which is invisible, and there's a feedback, which is invisible. And it is the marriage between the feeding and the feedback which gives us our physical manifestation. So when we are born, what I'm saying is we have the arrival of a balanced field, and that's in the womb of the mother. And the only way that we can see the baby inside the womb of the mother is either with X-ray or with an ultrasound. And we don't see the baby until it's born. And at that point, we have a physical manifestation. And so energy is always coming in, and that's fine. But part of the growing is the feedback, because the feedback represents the interaction with the environment of the earth and the information that is transmitted by all the other plasma, which includes the horizontal people, the vertical people, the planet and the sun and everything else. And so we can't see this crossover point because it's invisible. And so we say somehow, some way, we are transmitting energy from our brain to our body, and we're transforming our physicality. And there's a connection between our brain and our heart, and there's a crossover point in there. And that crossover point is from the non-visible to the visible. It's from the non-physical to the physical. This is the essence of physical manifestation. So in other words, when we're looking at the impact of the involvement of the various fields, we have rotating fields of transmission and transition, which we see that with our DNA RNA combination. And we have two hemispheres and they rotate together, and there is a connection, and we can't see this connection. But in order for these two to come together, they have to rotate in opposite directions because opposites attract. And there's a connection. And if they are opposite, then there will be friction. So there has to be something to connect. And when you have this connection, and then energy comes in, once this is a balanced Maglev field, and as energy comes, energy has to go. And at some point in time, the part of the growth is what we call cell division. And so we know that this all comes together because our Earth is constructed the same way. We have a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere, but we know that we have a whole Earth. So how do we have plasma rotating fields and they come together? So there has to be some kind of connection, an invisible connection. So let's extend this, and I called them in the past the eddy currents, but what they are is the connecting fields. So when you have two plasma fields coming together, one and one is more than two, and that third field is a connecting field. So what we're saying is that if we take a neutron and we break that up into an electron-proton combination, if this is an addition, we call that a creation. And in the process of this breakup, we create a array, which is a PM tick. But if the neutron will dissolve into electron-proton combination, and there is a ray creation, which we call a PM tick, we call that decay. So if we grow, we call that a creation, and if we diminish, we call that a decay. But we can grow in physicality. So the decay of the higher energy leads to the creation of a lower energy. And there is a connection, and we call that a bond. And we can't see it. We can't explain it. We just call it a bond. And so this becomes the bonding factor. If we were to take the previous description and compare and say, if we take the neutron on the top and it breaks up into an electron-proton combination on the right top, it still has to maintain a connection. And if we create another neutron and it breaks up into electron-proton combination on the bottom, it still maintains a connection. And if these two want to be bonded together, then they have to be flipped over, don't they? So that there is a connection. And the higher strength feeds the lower strength. And it's unconditional. So their connection can be split up. So if we take the neutron on the top, it's connected to the electron-proton combination on the right top. And it is connected, therefore, because it's bonded to the electron-proton marriage on the bottom. And the neutron in the bottom right-hand corner, therefore, will bond similarly to the electron-proton combination on the top right corner. So we now have a structure where the higher strength is feeding the lower strength, and all of this together is in a mag-rav condition. It's in balance. So if we were to take the clutter out of the picture, then we see that there is a residue. These PM ticks. These PM ticks are the product of the creation or the product of the decay. In other words, these PM ticks now could be a fudge factor because we can't see them, we can't account for them. We just know that there's something bonding and we know that there's something causing cell division. Let's carry on with this because basics in terms of positive and negative charge is based on surface to volume ratios. So we found with a straight line, we only have 2 negative charges, but if we put a bend, we can get a third negative charge. And so in order to maintain this balance, we have to introduce these positive charges. And the thing about the point in the bend is it has to go in a different axis. So the dark green line is the x-axis, which is transmission, and the light green line is the y-axis, which is the transition. Curves operate the same way. You have the negative on the outside and the positive on the inside. And we said that the flux lines that follow the surface of the Earth, they travel all the way around. And they have different densities. They have different field strengths. And if we draw a tangent point, which is a flat line that comes to contact a point on the Earth, and we draw a 90-degree angle, which we call a perpendicular line. That's 90 degrees. And if we were to follow this perpendicular line with a stone, we found this stone on the beach, and we decided to pick it up and pick it up straight up. Well, what we find is that the stone is more dense than the air. And the only way that that stone can stay above the ground is because we are holding it. But that stone wants to come back down to the ground. And so what we describe is these flux lines, they're not all the same. In other words, the flux lines stretch, and the top flux line, and if you connect the top on the right and with the red and goes right around the planet and comes back on the other side, you will find that it comes back one row down. And you follow that one around, and that becomes green, and it goes right around the Earth and comes back and connects, but it goes one row down. And then it comes around, becomes light blue, goes around the Earth, and connects, but goes one road down. And at some point, that one turns the dark blue, goes around the Earth, and actually becomes part of the Earth. So by being able to lift and drop this stone, you're stretching these flux lines. And the flux lines basically are seeking density. And so the Earth is more dense than the stone, so the stone will fall to the Earth. The air is less dense than the Earth, so the air is above the stone, above the Earth. But because of our force, our external force, we were able to lift the stone. And so by holding that stone, we not only have air above the stone, but we have air below the stone. But if we let that go, these flux lines will snap together. So you better move your feet because gravity seeks density. But the way we understand gravity is it's a one-way street. And so when we have to understand that it's a two-way street, and it's a two-way street in every dimension. And we know that because when we look at the structure of a shell, such as a snail, and we find that it has growth, and this growth follows a rotating field. And so as it grows and gets bigger, the pattern remains the same. And you see you can almost see the flux lines on the snail, how it rotates around. But the snail is smooth. When you look at the conch shell on the left-hand side, it has spikes. So those spikes grow from the shell, which grew in a spiral formation, and each of those spikes are growing in a spiral formation, but on a different dimension. So the spiral is growing on an X, Y, and Z axis, and the spiky is growing on an X, Y, and Z axis, but on a different dimension. Wait a second. So I have 3 dimensions on the basic structure, and then I have 3 dimensions on the spike formation. And these 3 main dimensions are in the physical dimension. Okay, I hope you got it. So we understand that the negative is the giver, is the magnetical aspect of it. But if we're going to go around, then we have to understand that the other side is also negative and the giver, right? So what's going on here? Well, that means in the middle is positive. And when you have this balance, as is shown in this picture, a balance in the x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis, that is a balanced maggraph, and as such, it's invisible. Well, how do these things maintain? Well, there has to be a connection. So there are what we call a plasma substructure, and this plasma substructure is maintained through plasma crossover points. And all of these are invisible. But what they are is an interaction of plasma fields, and as shown here, between 2 star formations. And are these star formations upright or upside down, or are they left to right? Well, gee whiz, I don't know. So when we look at the new spaceships, the only way that we know which way we're going is one side has a window. And we like to see where we're going, don't we? But how do we maintain this? And so we have this balanced field that is going around, but it doesn't go just in circles. It goes in a spiral formation. And as such, it's negative on the outside and solid. And we have a balance on the center axis. So which way are we going? And that's the point. When we look at it from our point of view, we are gravitational. And what we're looking at or where we're going is magnetical. When we look at it from the point of the Earth is gravitational. And what the Earth sees is magnetical. So we have a magnetical relationship with the Earth that's interacting with our magnetical relationship. And that relationship is invisible. And you know that because you can jump up and down. And when you jump up and down, there is no physical connection, but somehow you spring back, right? You come back down to the ground. But if you could just blast off to go into space. So, but in order to do that, you would need an external force. So the thing about the spaceship unit, it has to have an external force which gives it a direction, because this direction has to be some kind of conversion of energy between the magnetical gravitational field forces. Who could that be? Maybe it's you. And who is you? Well, you is inside your head, and your soul is inside your head. And last week we talked about the boundary of the soul being the supragranular layer. And we've seen that there's a relationship between the x-axis being negative and the y-axis being negative and the z-axis being your gravitational field. Well, if the field is gravitational, how is it staying there? So we find that the soul can travel. So we understand in physics that we can daisy chain fields together and that we could connect them. And this was a representation that I did with ponds. And we had these ponds and there's water flowing between all these ponds. And as long as there's a connection and as long as energy is coming in, being water, and energy going out, being water, when there's a balance, we have a flow, but there's a connection. So the energy that's coming in is coming from another source, an outside source. So this is a Maggrav condition. And another Maggrav condition, if we don't have the connection, the physical connection, but we have an indirect connection, such as Hawaii and Alaska being indirectly connected to the United States, we call Hawaii and Alaska as part of the contiguous United States. In other words, all the states are continuous, except Hawaii and Alaska are connected, but not physically. So there's some kind of non-visible bridge. And so we call that a legal jurisdiction. But what happens if we put a break in that connection? And that's what we've done. We have put limitations on our souls because we haven't understood things and we can't know everything. So we have to know by connection. And if we don't make this connection, that is just going to limit our souls. And we know that there's more because we've seen it with the 92 Tesla. We've seen the measurement on the x-axis. We've seen the measurement on the y-axis, and we've seen that it did not change. The z-axis changed, and it was instantaneous. And so you find that we got to 129 Tesla. Well, where did this energy come from? From an external source. So we were able to increase the field strength. And that field strength increase came from non-visible, non-tangible, plasma energy, the same energy that you get in the cups of life. So you created a pattern, and in there you got not just zinc GANs, not just copper, but CO2 GANs, CaCO3 GANs, water, and amino acid. All of that you got in there. And isn't that the way the earth operates? Look at all the resources on this earth. And so when we see how energy flows around the earth and how we decide what is it that we physically manifest, so it manifests by field strength, by position. And we find that different densities can operate at different field strengths. But in order for airplanes to stay high in the sky, there has to be an external input of energy. They have to fly. And the faster they fly, the higher they can go. So we find there's a difference between commercial and military airplanes in terms of the height that they fly. And we find the same thing with satellites. There's commercial and military satellites, and they fly at different heights. But when the airplanes are flying, the engines have to be on. But when the satellites fly, the engines are off. Why? Because the satellites are flying in the magnetical orbit around the planet. And the airplanes are flying in the gravitational fields near the surface. So when you're between the here and the there, you're operating under different field strengths. And the closer you get to the ground, the stronger it gets. Why? Because the gravitational field forces seek density. And so as you go around, how do you go around? Well, you absorb energy. And so as you absorb energy, you get heavier, you get more dense. And so as we go around, we gravitate towards the center. There is a point between the orbiting fields and the gravitational fields where our souls sleep and where our souls interact with other souls. And whether or not we interact with these other souls is determined by certain criteria. And so if we can achieve this, then we can fly into outer space. And if we don't achieve this, we may have to stay in inner space. So our goal is to achieve into outer space. In other words, we can do both. We can travel in inner space and we can travel in outer space. Well, what is this criteria? This criteria has to do with the fact that we have a soul of the man and a soul of the body. And the soul of the body has an emotion. The soul of the man also has an emotion. And so the combination of the two is the emotion of presence. But somehow we are chained down here. And so what has to change? What has to change is the limitations that we place on our souls. And so our blood anchors us to this planet, okay? But that's only one component. That's the component of our emotional GANs of the body. That's our emotional connection to our physical body. That is the anchorage of the soul of the body. And that is the manifestation and transmutation from the brain body. The connection of the brain body is to the soul of the man. And the intermediary is the emotion of the mind. And so now we have a connection, an understanding that the emotion of presence is based on the interaction of the emotion of the soul of the man with the emotion of the soul of the body. And this is non-visible, non-tangible, but it is fundamental not only to our independence, but our interdependence, because all of this is based on trust. And this trust is based on inertia. And the inertia of what? Well, it's the PM ticks. The PM ticks, which constitutes what we see in outer space, what we call the matter gem. And so when the soul is disconnected from everything that is going on in the universe, then we are not drawing the energy from the right source. So we are limited in how much energy we connect to. And so this becomes our soul disconnection. And our soul disconnection is limited by our understanding that when we have our own basis, which is our matter energy level, which is the lowest energy level, it is somehow disconnected. But this picture is literally upside down, isn't it? Because the lowest energy level is the matter energy level. And unfortunately, too many of us have disconnected our soul from that energy level. And so we have this fight, this internal fight, and it's part of the dark matter energy level, as we can interact with our intermediate level, but we cannot transcend to the higher level. And the higher level is always, always, always connected to the universe. Okay, so this is our limitation. Let's understand how this works. Many of you like to have a nice set of stereo system in the house, high fidelity speakers, right? Basic physical system, audio, nothing too fancy, right? But we have woofers and tweeters, don't we? And a long time ago, I learned a lot about making high fidelity speakers. And to my amazements, the tweeters made excellent woofers and the woofers made excellent tweeters, but that's another subject. And the thing that really made this work was when we had crossover networks and we had filters. So basically, woofers are gravitational and tweeters are magnetical, right? But the induction coils would change that. And that's what would feed the speakers. But then there would be a feedback, which we created baffles. And that we call a bass reflex. And it needed it more. And this is one of the reasons, not understanding this is one of the reasons that people who install high fidelity speakers in these modern cars have lousy systems, lousy sound, because they don't take into consideration the feedback. So when we look at stereo, what it is, there's a low range and there's a high range. And in a basic design of a speaker, you like to introduce a crossover. And what the crossover does is you have your optimum energy coming in at particular sounds, but it actually only comes in at one particular point. That is your focus point. And so what the crossover control tries to do physically is to spread this point out and make it flatter. And then it tries to cross over in an ideal fashion. So regardless of the frequency of the sound, that the sound would be the same strength. And if you have a really, really high fidelity speaker, you'll find that these crossovers actually take the energy and combine it together in a synergistic format. And if you add a proper physical construction, you will get the feedback. So you will attain greater fidelity by having more synergy and better quality of feedback. And so this is what happens to us. We are plasmagen receivers, and what we receive is what we're getting from our outbound source, our outbound feedback and our outbound source. The combination is our outbound perception. And so now, as we finish this series of classes, we understand the difference between the physical science and the plasma science. And so what we're going to, as we cross over the watershed, and we understand that when we're studying nuclear decay, that is all part and parcel of the energy coming through the plasmagen, the aminogen, and the carbogen. And, it's very unfair to say that this is a problem of man, because this is the way the universe is created. And we all want to come to the greater oneness. That's what spiritual teachers teach us. But our greater oneness is only based on our outbound vision. And so our vision is kind of creating a false sense. And we have to fudge things. And the worst kind of fudging is in our atomic math, where we find that the neutron mass equals the proton mass and the electron mass combination. But we're missing something. So we add the matter, antimatter, and dark matter mass, which is the plasmatic mass, but we're still missing something. We're missing the mass of the PM ticks, right? This is the energy that you give. This is the energy that you receive. And this is the totality that is achieved through the energy level balance and positioning. So when we look at the mass, we have to understand that there's a difference. There's a light mass, there's a soul mass. There's all kinds of different mass. And the thing is that this is determining whether we ascend or we descend, whether we're awake or we're in the dream state. Whatever the transcendence is, there is a transcendence between the aminogen state and the post-amino acid state. And all of these are different field strengths. And so there's a transitory field strength also between here and there. And that is the fudge factor, what we've been talking about. So we've seen in the neutron math, we always have to fudge something on our periodic table of elements. Pi, we can't rationalize it. Leap years, we can't even get our calendar straight. We have to adjust this every 4 years. And what is the super granular layer, which is a special gift for humanity that allows us to communicate with what? So we find that our PM ticks are the key to the soul unlimitations. These are energy packs. These are energy packs that represent the indomitable spirit of our soul. This is the dream energy. This is what gives us the spice of life. So there's a soul sequencing. The soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth attracts the soul of the man. That's us. And the soul of the earth plus the soul of the man attracts the soul of the body. That's the manifestation. But it's still not visible. It's the soul of the earth plus the soul of the body that manifests the physicality of the body. And our physicality is born on Earth, not on Mars. So this is why we need to try and get back to normal. And we have to understand that our normal also involves the plasma fields of the sun. So the relationship of the sun and the earth is our navigation point. And so many of us have lost our way. And so we can't find our way because we can't see. And so one of the gifts of the Keshe Foundation, especially to the US military, is the Vision Enhancement Unit, particularly for the PTSD recovery. This gives us a plasmagen interaction, and it enhances the soul and enhances the spirit. And it does this very, very quickly. And so we have placed artificial in limitations. And so when we're looking at the connections, we have to understand that getting back to nature is to unlimit the soul, to put in unlimited connections and understand that there's more. We need to do more and be more. And so when we define plasma, and especially when we have millions of people who still don't even know what this is, just tell them in one sentence. Plasmagen is a kind of energy state. It's the connection between your dream state and your energy state. And if you understand that, then you overcome the limitations of science. And you don't need to be a scientist to do this. But boy, oh boy, it sure is important, because all of us are doing things backwards. We are robbing the poor. So in the plasma science, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so now we understand that at the beginning, the principal matter is created from the PM ticks, and the PM ticks are giving. So they are magnetically flying around everywhere. And if you create the plasmagen field where you can convert this energy and you can draw this in, and you do this by having an inertia field, which creates a field interaction. Any two fields coming together create a third. 1 and 1 is more than 2. So there's nothing wrong with it being man-made. It's understanding the role of man, whether it's a vertical enhancement unit or a horizontal enhancement unit, a universal enhancement unit. The thing is, we need to cross this peace bridge, and we cannot do it the way we're doing it now. Things have to change. We have to transcend and lead from our soul. Understand that heaven is here on earth, and we need to transcend that understanding so that we can cross the peace bridge. That is how our souls can cross over. And when we cross over, we will transform, transcend, and even through physical transportation to other planets, we may go through our own transmogrification. So this business of energy binding and self-serving and double crossing, this is all done at the expense of others. And it's the use and abuse of souls, and it puts limitations on these souls. But what is the missing ingredient? What is that non-tangible missing thing? That is the morality. The morality is missing. And so there is an energy within that, and it creates tumbleweeds. So the cross you double cross is your eternal burden, and it's full of mental weeds, many penalties. These penalties are painful. So, and all of us have to go through this and understand that the universe has ethics. And when our ethics combine with the ethics of the universe, then we now have the essence of creation. And so we could say fundamentally that involves morality, compassion, and courage. And does it take courage to have morality and compassion? Well, something has to. It's time to get dirty, isn't it? We have to understand what ethos is. Ethos constitutes ethical behavior. And ethical knowing is the common denominator for all of us. And we know this as long as we are connected. And so there's more than just physical comforts. We need moral comforts, right? We need moral comforts, and not to send mental weeds everywhere, but to send the love that we get from the universe. The universe gives us the dynamic transfer of energy, which we manifest into the physical. And that requires a little target practice, right? So we can transfer dynamically into our physical state, wherever that may be. And the way to do that is to take the limitations off of our souls. So we understand that you, the soul of man, is the essential you. And you are really an interaction between your plasmagen state and your mattergen state. And that manifests into the soul of the body, which is not you, but it's a surrogate you. That is your physical state, which is the interaction between the plasmagen state and the environment matter state, the small m matter state. And so we use the stacker units and we use the universal cup to try and assist us in our target practice, because this is how we manifest the peace dome. The peace dome is an emotional transformation from our souls to ourselves, and from ourselves to this planet. It's the connection of the plasma state between the earth space and the outer space. It's the plasma feeding from outer space to the plasma feedback from our inner space. And the universal body enhancement units are taking us beyond our dream state. This is the knowing by connection. You can't know everything, but you know what? Your souls are able to connect to everything. And so to understand this connection and to understand the plasma science, you understand that our souls need to cross over. How many times do we need to cross over? We can cross over as many times as we want, because there's a contiguous connection with the universe. And that involves connecting with the universal community. So the universal community also has souls, but they don't want to connect with hooligans. So it's really very difficult for hooligans to do a proper soul crossover. So they remain disconnected. And that is painful. And furthermore, is very lonely. So if we need to connect, and we can connect, and we need to learn how to connect, and we need to teach other people how to connect, then we can understand what manifestation is. That is our perception. It's our perception of the stacker and the universal reality. Two fields come together, they form another. Any formation of any field is a manifestation, but that manifestation is dependent on the plasma feeding and the feedback. Both feeding and feedback leads to this manifestation. And so it could be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible, plasmatic or physical, but in all cases, there's a plasmatic reality. Maybe there could be a physical reality, but not in every case, because the reality is the form artifact, whether it's plasmatic or physical. In either case, it's a manifestation. But you know what? It's dependent on the emotion of presence, because the emotion of presence is the form artifact of energy in motion. So when we want to take the unlimitations of our soul, we have to drop the physicality and look at our emotional transformation. It's our emotional transformation which connects us to our physical reality. And so what does that mean? That means Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute is presenting plasma science, calling all Earth patriots, both near and far. We need to sign the World Peace Treaty. We need to act on the World Peace Treaty. We all want physical and emotional vitality. And so with really signing that with our hearts and our souls, we can go through this transformation, this hypocrisy of having a conflict with armed sales and then negotiating peace. That's not the way to morality. Morality is the path link to soul unlimitations. And that's why plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of this lesson, and that's the end of the knowing classes. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed your trip, and please proceed to the departure lounge.
Thank you, Alex. That was quite a large bite to take in all at once. I know each one you can open up for quite a long time, but I do thank you for delivering it. And this, of course, will be archived in the Foundation's archives or in our Telegram group here for further review and further understanding. And if you said this is the last teaching, does that mean we're going back to the basics, or do you have something else in mind?
I think we all have something in mind, and it's coming on June the 6th. I don't know what I'll be doing next week, so stay tuned. I have plans.
Okay, while we allow Alex to warm his tea and his toes, he said it's not too cold there today, so that's good. As has been our custom, we usually ask at this point, do we have any new people that have joined us? And maybe if you'd like to just state your name and where you're from, we'd be more than happy to hear from you. And don't feel bashful. This is a very friendly family, and we're always looking for the new members to come in. I did see a couple of names in the list that I haven't seen before, but that doesn't mean that they're new or here for the first time. They could be older knowledge seekers that periodically join, or they could be a new student. I understand the Foundation is making a number of, or applications have been, I guess, vetted, and we'll see some new people coming into the private teachings of the Keshe Foundation, which is slightly different or a little bit more in depth than the public teachings, let's say. But either way, the knowledge is immense. But please be reminded that our souls have a double PhD in this knowledge. So as you get closer to your soul, more of this can also be revealed in a very curious way, I suppose, without the blackboards or the backgrounds that we think is the standard type of learning. And this is part of the enlightenment that Mr. Keshe talks about, is trying to get closer to your soul, to reveal some of these secrets, because this is your creator. And once you've realized that you don't need any intermediaries or people to tell you how to find it, it all becomes between you, yourself, and your creator. And of course, the larger creator, if we look at it as the creator said, I made man in the image of myself. Just ask one more time, is there anyone here for the first time who'd like to introduce themselves? I see Pat. I'm not sure if that's a man or a woman.
Yeah, that's me. I'm from Mexico, and this is my first time here with you. I've been following some of the weekly knowledge seekers in YouTube, and it's my first time here live. So I'm very happy to join you.
You're very welcome. You know, I thought you might have met up with Liliana in Mexico. There is a group, and I know Gianni will be doing some teaching in there starting Monday, and it will be open to the public. So you can feel free to, are you aware of that, Pat?
Yeah, that's why I joined right now, because I got the message in the Telegram channel. And yeah, I'm joining.
Great, beautiful. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people looking for this sort of knowledge. I know the answers in the conventional world have been few and far between for new solutions. And
Sure, yeah.
anything else you'd like to add, please feel free.
But not really. I'm very, very
What attracted you
happy
to
to be
this
here.
knowledge? What sort of, was it your soul, or were you trying to find a way to maybe balance something in your physicality? What was it that,
Yeah, well, yeah, balance, of course, balance. I've been practicing Qigong for quite 2 years,
oh,
and
Qigong?
I find, but Shinheng, the Qigong, that's Shinheng
Okay,
from the Dr. Pang, and I kind of needed a little bit more of the rationale and the explanations, and I was making organize and began kind of following that physics thing, and I was not trained in electronics or stuff. So it was part curiosity and part of like all of my soul. And well, I ended up here.
excellent. That's very nice. And your English is excellent too, as well as your Spanish, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I'm a Mexican. So my mother's tongue is Spanish, actually. But my grandfather was British, so I kind of inherited that other language.
Yes, you know that we do have a program on Tuesdays, the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for World Peace and Justice. And that's another public program where we're going to unite the nations and the languages together and get rid of the borders, so to speak, so we can all move about this planet freely, the way the whales or the birds do.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it?
Very much so.
So let's do it. Sure.
Well, welcome. A big welcome.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you. It was great meeting you.
Yes,
It
anytime.
was a great, lots of learning.
Oh, it's a tremendous amount, Mr. Keshvari. It's the
Tremendous, yeah.
knowledge of the universe, and he's trying to disperse it, not only here on this planet, but to the universal community as well. Apparently, even though they've been surviving and living for a long time, they're in the same position we are, trying to get back to the mother or trying to find their souls. As he said many times, and I was surprised, if they knew how to fly with their soul, they wouldn't be in the spacecraft.
Sure.
So we have a lot to learn, and some of the systems that have been presented and have been developed and will be continued, we will help to develop them, will also add to this whole mixing of the universal community and the people here, because we're all from the same creator. Even if one has one eye and 10 legs, they're from the same creator as we are, but we just don't understand fully the process of the creation and the creator and the bigger view.
So it's like a breakthrough our limitations. No?
Yes, and all
our
these
physicality is grounding us to the ground, to say it somehow. No, we have to. Yeah, it's breakthrough times.
Yes, and all these problems that we've been facing in every nation as of late in the last couple of years have sort of brought us together, and where we're looking for new answers and new knowledge and new solutions, because the old systems are just not functioning, even with food distribution and electrical distribution and so on. They just don't seem to function properly.
Yeah, we're lucky to be living in this time where everything is crumbling apart. Everything's opening to.
And that's what I was reading in the Wikipedia about the plagues that were going to come or something. I guess some of the religions believe this, and you know, before the Mekti, what they call the Mekti, would announce himself. So some of these things are predicted, and I guess at the higher levels of many of these religions, they're coming to the point to realize that this is the year, or this is the time of the announcement of the promised one. And each religion sort of has a different take on, you know, we look at it maybe if you're a Christian as Christ, and different ones, different ways of Buddhism. Maybe the Buddha is going to return, but it's the one that is rightly directed, I was reading. And of course, he said, we're all Mektis. It's a beautiful teaching, and it's an equalized teaching for everyone, that no one's going to be abused due to a lack of knowledge. And this is why we're trying to get the nations together and to develop some of these new systems. I guess it's a little bit more than just walking in there and taking off to the moon. There's some development. So thank you very much. Is it Patricia, or you prefer Pat?
I prefer Pat.
Very well, Pat. Thank you. Thank you for
Okay, thanks a
sharing
lot. It
with
was
us.
great meeting you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Welcome.
Bye. Thank you.
Anyone else here for the first time before we go back to Alex? I'm sure we have 51 neutrons, beautiful neutrons here, or soul of the man. Is anyone else here for the first time? Is Alfonso? Let's see. I thought I saw another one. Sonny, are you here for the first time? I see S-O-N-I. Is that Sonny? Esperera? Maybe she's away or he's away. I'm not sure if Sonny could be used either way. We've addressed men and women as Sonny. How about Alfonso? Are you here for the first time? He doesn't have a microphone. No problem. I just noticed that. No problem. Okay, is your tea warmed up, Alex? Are you ready to continue?
I am ready to continue, and I'm hoping that you all know that in the background, the Spanish are translating.
Okay.
We have a very large group in the back, and
Great.
I hope they've recovered. It was a rough trip, wasn't it?
Yes, I'm sure you might have had to have two translators there, one to take over midstream. You were on a roll, as they say.
Well, it was the last class. But I am open to any questions on my limited knowledge.
You know, I heard an interesting one this week on another program. And of course, this is going to be totally reversed now, but the gentleman was saying 1% rule the world, 4% are their puppets, 90% are asleep. The 5% are aware and try to wake up the 90%, while the 1% use the 4% to try to stop the 5% from waking up the 90%. But now I think we're going to have 95% elevating the 5%, the 1% plus their puppets. So we're going to really change things around. And of course, there's going to be no punishment for those who have tried to abuse the man, whether it would be in religions. And I always thought that punishment would be a good thing, but as Mr. Kesh is directing us, punishment is not the way to go. It's the elevation of the soul is what's needed. So this is the way we're going to go. So I think we'll be elevating some of these others who have actually tried to harm humanity as a whole. And of course, they'll be receiving direction, I think, through the Universal Council. And that's one of the reasons it was set up, is not to have power so much, but to have and provide advice and direction to some of the religions, perhaps, and the world leaders as the Mekti is about to announce himself, as I understand it. And again, I was reading, it's the rightly directed one is the Mekti, and so many other things that you could read on Wikipedia, whether they're correct or not, or in the dictionary looking up. I didn't even know how to spell it, but it's spelled M-E-H-D-I. And this is where we have the term Mekti. if I'm even pronouncing it correctly. So thank you, Pat. Would anyone like to ask a question of Alex at this point? Unless everyone understood. Dan, I see your mic is open.
You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Regarding the spaceship physicality in the spaceship, you're saying in the first sentence, when it's not able to carry the physicality only in the soul level, when you enter in the spaceship enhancement unit.
Yes, and
I
I'm
want
not an
to-
expert, Dan, so don't
Yes,
take my
don't
word as
worry.
the absolute truth. You have to check it out with the
Yes, but
knowledge and what you understand.
it's digging something because I collegate something in the, when Mr. Keshe explained regarding the interface, let's say, plasma capacitors. When she had the wire, which means the matter of copper, no? Inside of GaNs with a little bit of piece of matter or nanomatter. It's transferring from the GaNs to the nano to the matter. And I collegate this with the food you put in the mouth is transformed because you have the other environment, let's
Okay,
say nano coating. You bring from matter to the nano to the GaNs plasma feeding system. And I connect with the shielding, with the layering of the spaceship of the craft. And I collegate with what she's saying, he's saying, I think I say correctly, regarding the matter is not matter when you have in the field of plasma. The example is the cup of life. It's not copper or zinc inside because it's already in the field of plasma. It's like a shell. You carry the physicality because it's embedded with the fields. Only the reverse of the coin, let's say, from matter to the plasma to the matter, which means my physicality. I will go with the donkey instead of shuttle with my soul. Embedded the physicality in the soul or soul in the physicality. This is what I want to remember. It's explained in 2015 regarding and what is she saying, Dean, feeding system. This
right.
is
If
all.
we develop a new feeding system, would we have to destroy another entity to maintain our structure? It seems we're being taught that that is a not correct way to approach this. But if we could just absorb the fields before they were converted into a soul, then that would be perfectly well.
You remember when Mr. Keshe explained how connection with tritium deuterium hydrogen, let's say star formation with two rings, with the reactors 12 and 6 and so on, equatorial, and making the connection, you have all what you are needed. And it's collegated with not touching the GaNs or the nano because you are the end of this formograph, no? Because what you are needed, you are achieved by transferring from one. It's like an orange when you make the plasma capacitor, not in the physicality, let's say in the fields or plasma dynamic, you create, or this is only my example. You need electricity, you create in electricity. You need the food, is creating the food, the banana, the orange, the etc. You need, I don't know, another shield in your craft or floor. You create another interaction with other and on another layer. It's only the example what is passing through my mind. But
referring to. Alex, we didn't get to answer, or you didn't get to answer too many questions today, but you did share a huge amount of knowledge with all of us. So thank you very much for all your efforts and delivering the knowledge consistently and regularly, almost like the way the neutron divides within us.
Well, I want to thank Adrian and the community for sharing that. It really enriched this presentation today, and I want to thank everybody on behalf of the North American Corona team for participating today. Beautiful session. So stand by for more exciting news. Over to you, Mark.
Right, and 90% or whatever 90-odd% reduction is beautiful to see, especially as we see the energy being sort of squeezed in a way for all of us. Even in this current cycle, the rates are up quite a bit. I know that just the petrol prices in the United States have gone up approximately 30–40% in the last year. So it's affecting all of us, and that's one of the things Mr. Kesh did when he went to the world governments in the original part, maybe in the early 2000s, where he said that he could show the people on the planet how to feed themselves and how to generate power for basically little cost. And of course, the government said, no, we don't want people to have this knowledge. And we want to thank Mr. Kesh for continuing to pursue and to develop and to share with the governments, as well as with the knowledge seekers and anyone else who cares to listen. Is there anything else from anyone else they'd like to say at this point before I go to this? It's about a 20-minute video. We showed the universal unit in the beginning, so we'll spend the other 19 minutes or so just seeing the progression of something that was done in China probably 2 years ago or more. And then we'll play the final disclaimer, and then the meeting will end.
I have a question for the Alex.
Okay, no problem.
He's talking about the neutron divide in the body. If neutrino gets to the body, what is happen?
Goes right through it unless it's in the matter state. That was one of the questions in the last 16. Mr. Kesh wondered about this when he was a youngster, when he sat on the end of the X-ray machine. When the neutrino goes through you, what did I give to it, or what did it take from me?
Yes, I think so. Stay in the body. Maybe someday Mr. Kesh explained a little bit more. He already told about that, right? Last teaching or before the last teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of your body, and there is the magic. Everything is there. I just want to say that.
Alex, is a neutrino the same as a neutron? I wouldn't think so, but it does have a similar sound to it.
Neutrino different, neutron different.
Okay. Thank you, Selena.
So I can't totally answer the question on a technical basis, but what I do want to say is that as humans, we are radioactive, just like bananas, and yet we're very safe. So there are ways and means of transferring energy, and this is where the advanced science has to go. So it's still, I have much to learn myself, but what we do know is that we have all the elements of the earth within us, and because we're part of that, and we just have it in different scales, and it all contributes together, and which is one of the reasons it brought us here. So the benefits to the earth is the common denominator here, and we have the various energy transportation vehicles that brought us here, which we call PM ticks of different strengths and different flavors. And this is what makes life so exciting. So as the knowledge seekers know more and get into the deeper knowledge, we can get out of this what I call extended basic teachings. So thank you for your question. But I think you're all well on the path to figuring this thing out. So thank you very much.
Yes, we're on the road to
Thank
find
you.
out.